Dave, thanks so much for first of all being in touch with me the past couple of days, because you've given me the heads up. You said look at the space with Weisselberg. Something's going on there, and you weren't so sure that the indictment was going to wait 2 or 3 weeks. You had a feeling this might happen. First of all, tell me why, and also why do we keep hearing Allen Weisselberg's name continuing to come up over the past 2-3 days? What have you been hearing that tipped your hand to this?
Yeah, good morning, Joe. The timetable that we're all expecting here was because it was set by Donald Trump, and that's why I thought you shouldn't believe that timetable of Tuesday or bust. All signs were pointing to an indictment sooner than later because they invited Trump to the grand jury to testify. That's usually the end game. And they had Michael Cohen testify, who was the punctuation mark of all this. So I'm not surprised that we saw an indictment. I thought that there would be multiple felonies that we did not expect. It was beyond the Stormy Daniels payments, and that may be the case. And the reason why I thought that way, Joe, was because we heard that Jennifer Weisselberg testified before the grand jury. Jennifer Weisselberg is the ex-daughter-in-law of longtime Trump Organization CFO Allen Weisselberg. She doesn't seem to have any inside knowledge about the Stormy Daniels payments, but she would seem to have knowledge about the internal finances of the Trump Organization. You know, she would be at the dinner table when this conversation would occur. And she's an estranged ex-daughter-in-law. She has a lot to say to prosecutors. So that led me to believe that this is more than just payments to Stormy Daniels. Now, we don't know. I think a lot of the counts are probably conspiracy counts, but don't be surprised if there are other counts there that haven't been discussed, like perhaps bank fraud, insurance fraud, other types of things that can make this a lot more serious. Also, Jennifer Weisselberg would be a very valuable witness in the trial, but a more valuable witness would be Allen Weisselberg. He knows where all the bodies are buried. So expect prosecutors in Manhattan to continue to pressure Allen Weisselberg to flip on Donald Trump. They're going to pressure him with a possible insurance fraud charge because Allen Weisselberg is nearing the end of his sentence at Rikers Island. He's 75 years old. He does not want to renew his room reservation there in prison.
Yeah, and it's interesting, when he was being sent to prison, Donald Trump, who's actually older than Weisselberg, said, look what they are doing to that poor old man. But there is, again, some interesting bits of information in the news accounts that you're hearing about this, including the fact that Bragg, according to sources, has communications between Trump Organization members. And so, again, it is. Some things seem to be pointing to perhaps something that's going to bring Mr. Weisselberg back into this. Dave, I'm also wondering, he can't help himself. Ron DeSantis embarrassed himself by saying he was going to fight extradition charges like he has any say. I mean, again, one more Republican that really just doesn't give a damn about the Constitution of the United States. And, of course, you gotta just...
What's this line?
Look at the Soros back. No, it's just Jews. They're attacking Jewish international bankers. It's what anti-Semites have been doing for hundreds of years, attacking Jewish international bankers. And that's what they do. They try to blame everything on Jewish international bankers. It's Germany, 1933. But why does Ron DeSantis further embarrass himself by saying, I'm going to ignore the Constitution and I'm not going to extradite Trump to New York?
Yeah, I saw that tweet, Joe. And look, he already knew that Donald Trump was saying through his lawyers that he was not going to fight extradition. I'm not so sure. You know, it doesn't seem in character for Trump to surrender voluntarily. So he may try to fight extradition, and the ball then would go into DeSantis's court. But here's the deal here. In the fact that the alleged criminal conduct occurred in New York while Donald Trump was a resident of New York means that this is in the category of a fugitive extradition. And that means that DeSantis has no power to stop the extradition. He can delay it, possibly a few months at most. But New York would then go to federal court and get an order of extradition. It's not hard to get in a case like this. Now, where DeSantis has some power is to try to stop a future extradition to Georgia, because that would be a non-fugitive extradition. Trump wasn't there at the time the alleged criminal conduct occurred. But that's why in this case, even though it looks like the Georgia case is stronger than the New York case, the extradition to New York will be easier than any extradition to Georgia. And here's one more thing. One reason why Trump may indeed surrender rather than go and fight extradition is to prevent DeSantis from looking like the protector. He doesn't want DeSantis to look like the alpha dog, because in the MAGA world, where image and symbolism mean everything, Trump doesn't want to make DeSantis look strong while Trump looks weak.
But Claire, let me pull you in here. Let's talk about Georgia, and just for argument's sake, as law professors would do in our law classes, just for argument's sake, let's say Donald Trump gets indicted in Georgia, and for some reason Ron DeSantis tries to stop him facing justice in Georgia for potentially trying to rig an election. The Supreme Court of the United States ultimately would reverse that in about 15 seconds, would they not?
Yeah, it is really. I think the tweet that Ron DeSantis did yesterday should be put on a marquee with flashing lights, because he has now revealed who he is. Yeah. He has revealed that this is all about performance politics with him. This is a Harvard-educated lawyer. He knows that there's an article in the Constitution that specifically forbids what he said yesterday, specifically addresses the Founding Fathers specifically talked about that executives of state shall cooperate with other jurisdictions when laws are being enforced. So, and frankly, I can't imagine that Trump is going to do anything other than surrender. I think Alvin Bragg would just want him to quietly surrender. I think the country should want him to quietly surrender. And so, DeSantis knows that. So he is now telling America, I am just as vacuous as Donald Trump. The substance of it doesn't matter. I am willing to say and do anything. And the irony here is he tweeted that he would violate the U.S. Constitution in order to win a nomination to become president, to put his hand in the air and swear over a Bible that he will uphold and defend the Constitution. So come on, give me a break. This is really embarrassing and very undignified. It's a clown show.
Yeah,
really bad for the country.
Political theater there from Governor DeSantis. We should also note Trump's lawyer just this morning reiterated his intent that he will surrender, that he's not going to fight extradition. Caroline, let's talk about, we don't know, obviously, everything that's in the indictment. That's going to be a few days before we do. But from what you are aware of the case, what is your assessment as to the charges that could come and the prosecution that would follow? And is it complicated that this is going to be on a state level rather than federal?
Absolutely. We've heard about Michael Cohen, who has previously been indicted at a federal level in the Southern District of New York for conduct related to sort of this overall hush money scheme. Again, it's not illegal to pay hush money. What we're talking about here is the documentation of it on Trump.org's financial disclosure forms. Unconfirmed reporting is that there's 34 counts potentially in this indictment. I don't think Bragg would move forward with an indictment that wasn't kicked up to a felony charge. We've now all heard that these are sort of misdemeanor offenses. However, prosecutors can kick it up to a Class E felony if they can show that the misdocumentation of the payments were done in furtherance of an additional crime. And as Claire noted, that's where this prosecution gets really tricky, because that additional crime could be a federal campaign finance law violation in the form of the hush money payment was, in fact, a contribution to the campaign just days before the election. It wasn't merely a personal payment to save Trump from the embarrassment from his wife and others that he had, potentially had an affair. So there are multiple issues with this prosecution. I think DA Bragg has a long road ahead of him. At a base level, you have to prove knowledge and intent. Intent to really defraud, not just intent to hide the payment. So legal scholars are asking, well, who was he intending to defraud? I think with the addition of Weisselberg, we're hearing it could potentially be New York State tax authorities. So there could be tax violations involved here. There are a myriad of sort of avenues through which Bragg could move this prosecution.
And adding to the whole myriad of things that Bragg would be facing, would he not also know that the Trump attorneys would be going to some level of appeals courts to try to overturn the indictment or stop it? And therefore, you would assume that they have various parts of the indictment that they feel would survive whatever appeals process that the Trump organization and or Trump himself would come and try to overturn this indictment.
Absolutely. So in order to get an indictment, the standard is just probable cause that a crime has been committed. However, in a situation like this, you have to know that Bragg feels much stronger about that. Obviously, you know, the standard to convict is beyond a reasonable doubt. And where it gets tricky, as you noted, is it's true. This federal election law violation theory, in order to kick up the misdemeanor charge to a felony, has not been tested at a trial level in New York State court. It has been used in some instances for guilty pleas and things of that nature. So there are sort of some precedents here. However, you know, you can't help but, like in this case to the John Edwards case with the payments to Rael Hunter, you know, that was a federal case. And, you know, it was a sort of a similar theory that these payments were not, in fact, personal. However, they were made for his campaign. That fell apart. You know, he was acquitted on one of the counts. The prosecutors declined to move forward with that prosecution. It's a shaky theory in the world of the federal land. Having it as the back channel in this state prosecution is even more risky.